Hey up. Yeah, I have to do that, you see. I have to drop my little chair so that I'm in the frame. How are you? Jack Chew here. Weekdays, 12:30 till 1 o'clock. And no guest on today. Don't all run away. Don't escape. If I see those numbers drop off, I'm just going to get upset and stuff. I'm going to try and have my mic discipline better today. I'm going to try and stay put and not wave my head around too much. So let me know you can hear me okay. Hopefully the signal looks stable. Everything looks to be working well. Thank you so much for those that have participated over the last few shows. It's been really interesting to get your feedback live and after the fact. But one of the things that I've been challenged on recently is there's been an awful lot on Physio Matters, on this show, on some of the Physio Matters podcast network shows as well, about issues been discussed, like first contact practice. We had a podcast with Rob Goodwin that's gone down really well. We've had the culture of physiotherapy we discussed with Geeta yesterday. And there's a few different bits and pieces that make me really interested in I'm kind of only like a soft call out almost, where people are saying, look, we're interested in what your take is on an evaluation or an analysis of that. And what their meaning is inviting me to talk big picture, like what do I see, excuse me, of being the challenges and opportunities that MSK practice faces in the UK at the moment, because that's a hat that I wear, especially Physio Matters and MSKR stuff. But also I've got my hand in clinically, obviously, with a private practice, and I'm just generally interested across the piece. So people have been baiting me to actually, it's hilarious. I never really thought that my opinion wasn't well known on some of this stuff, but I suppose it's always a moving picture. And some of I think probably it's last year that people last heard my take on where we're up to on stuff. And so I'm happy to share that. I'm sorry if you think I've not been particularly forthcoming. I've daily shows, and so for me, I'm overexposed. But it's interesting that you feel like even some claims that I've been dodging some of those issues. I've noticed here that one Mr. Meekins has, firstly, he was being nice, and I think he was helping me to say that my sound check was good with a little okay sign, and then he's gone straight for the hair banter, which is the low-hanging fruit. So, yeah, thanks, Adam. Haircut's looking ponderous. He's not sure. I don't know if I hope that's like a typo, an emoji-related typo. But yeah, hopefully, saying that, of course, nothing but banter that this crew cut deserves. But yeah, Mrs. Chew's been top draw on that. She was cutting my hair a couple of weeks ago, and she's just like, "This is me now, isn't it?" Right? There's no need or want for you to go back to a barber's. I'm sorry, no. It was like 10:30, and finally managed to wrestle the kids to bed, and she's there shaving my head, and it's just like, oh yeah, unless I can find a hairdresser that can do it at such a demand. Alistair Beverley, 100% you've been overexposed on here of late. Yeah, absolutely. That's fair to say. He's mentioning that he's coming at me from Periscope on Twitter, so unless he means particularly on Twitter, especially with all the Therapy Live stuff around. So fascinating then that some people would try and ask me my take on some of that and to unpack it, especially around workforce. That's one of the things that people have been bothered about, because I've been fairly vocal about what I think the challenges are for first contact practice and how it disrupts in some positive ways and some negative ways the industry. And so I want to kind of go there today. And I want to start by asking you your take. Difficult to probably put into a brief few words on the chat, but I'm interested in what you think. If you can give me the headlines of that, you don't have to give your it's a big question, so I accept that you're not going to necessarily have one word answers, but I mean, like, what do you see as being the opportunities and challenges? Like, what's the most exciting thing and what's the least exciting thing or most challenging thing that you think we're facing? So something like first contact obviously can fall into both of those, and it does, but also recruitment, workforce, what challenges are you facing, but also then what opportunities do you think are knocking in terms of reputational lift on the industry? How do you see us being able to take advantage in many ways of the emergence from the pandemic and all the opening back up of sports facilities, of leisure, of getting some sort of normal? What's your opinion on those opportunities too? And I'm happy to share them today. What I want to start with then is the fact that, to me, there is a massive opportunity that comes from the way in which we can reset and open as the world opens back up and people are then starting to do more interesting things with their bodies. I think there is a vulnerability, especially for those that have been less active or at least things people have been doing different things with their bodies in the disrupted time that we've had for over 12 months. Massive modified lifestyles pretty much across the board. There are certain circumstances where you can imagine what they're asking of their body hasn't changed much, but generally speaking, it's quite significant. And so that can go be in two ways. One is which people have been more idle for, or less active in various different ways, for work, for function, for chores, for sport and exercise. Of course, they've done less. But then there's also those that have done more. They've had more time on their hands. They're taking up more running. We know we've had spikes in metrics for couch to 5K, that sort of stuff. Especially in the times where you were meant to only leave your house for an hour a day for exercise and stuff. People were making sure that then suddenly they were craving a massive walk. So whilst the opportunity that knocks there for MSK is the fact that I think that for both those reasons, for those that are going to be doing less and those that are going to be doing more, that change in circumstances and the forces that are put through our body, if we're thinking sort of load-centric terms, but also the psychosocial difference is going to be meaningful. Now, I hope we could say that that's going to be positive in that people are going to be able to socialize again and stuff like that, the psychosocial benefits. But unfortunately, that means sometimes for some people it's re-exposure to a workplace they don't enjoy and they might be missing working from home, or it's re-engagement with friends and family, of which bring with it challenges and stresses and difficulties, especially when we're all going to be awkward in those early stages. I'm hearing about patients openly sharing conflicts in their houses with regards to differences of opinion in COVID hesitancy. Like people that are wanting to, I'll meet you in a beer garden, and they're going in for a hug and then getting arsey with them for the fact that that's not really how they're feeling about it, not quite ready for that yet and stuff. And it's like the various different new things that are coming between people means that I think that whilst MSK and these things are precursors for injury directly, but I just think that we know that a change in circumstances and what we ask of our bodies and what we ask of our systems in general, I think that probably will be influencing people's symptoms, people's wants and needs. I think people are going to therefore not imagine this something that you might have been able to live with when you're just pottering around your house, but then when you're wanting to get back and the weather improves, I think there's a seasonal effect to this as well. If the weather does improve, that people are going to be getting out and about more, and the knee problem that they might have managed all right at home emerges itself as soon as they want to walk more than half a mile a day. That could happen. It could be that there's therefore a need. I think there is going to be a spike in demand. We're also seeing that, the data is playing out on that. I've heard from various different NHS services, they're back up to 95% demand. Private practice, it's busy in many ways for inquiries. Different locations have got different styles of lockdown skepticism, and I think that matters. How where that delay has been. Some practices have been really busy sooner than others, but I think that makes a difference, and I think that's one of the things I wanted to come to. So these are I'm just listing what I think is the key opportunity, is that I think that there's a massive need for us if we step into it. Now, I would always argue that can be taken well, in that we can take advantage of that opportunity by being the people that can help them get from where they are to where they want to get to, do a thorough examination and analyze their problem and understand all the factors affecting it, and then come up with functional solutions that can then rehabilitate them to back to where they want to get to, not even back to where they want to be, and to hopefully, with reasonable limits on goals, achieve what they want to achieve. If we can be those people, the opportunity is huge across sectors. Whereas unfortunately that opportunity just for demand can therefore go a negative way for me, in which the industry at large, if it was to take that opportunity and therefore suck people into over analysis of a style of practice, say that I'm less into. So if we, instead of doing what I just described as being my preferred style of practice, you then end up getting people in, and therefore it becomes almost like treating them like machines. It's like, more people, more MOTs, essentially, like, this is fine, but you're moving badly and you need to come and see us for this being corrected and that being corrected, or there's a sort of secondary exploitation of the opportunity. Just because there's a demand, then it's tempting to then become complacent and start thinking, well, let's retain these patients, or let's try and fix the problems arbitrarily and not necessarily collaborate with them to empower them and to actually resolve health problems and to encourage them towards a more fit and healthy lifestyle or whatever. There's an opportunity that demand brings that can also then be taken advantage of. And I don't necessarily mean by unscrupulous people. I'm just meaning like generally they if you're back to back, with patients, then complacency sets in various different ways, and I can understand why in many ways. So I'm not just talking about people being like fraudulent. I'm talking about people that that opportunity knocks for demand, and then the style of practice piece is really relevant to me, and I think that sometimes that can be taken advantage of. So then the challenge is for me that because of the way that the NHS shut down many of its services, not completely, let's not pretend that happened, but definitely there was a massive disruption to standard care, particularly in the NHS in a prolonged way, and that can be disruption to orthopedic surgical lists through to MSK services going just remote, and then not just going remote, but also there were many services that I heard about where they had contacted everyone on their current lists and their waiting lists and said, or maybe it was most of which actually was the waiting list, but some of which the existent patient base got evaluated and triaged for urgency, and therefore was sent a note to say, we're starting from scratch. If you still have a need based on these criteria, then you need to re-refer yourself. And that process of starting that again has meant that I'm hearing from people about significant waiting lists, particularly on the NHS, which we know is one of the draws to if someone's got, let's say, that knee problem I've just described, where they were fine pottering around the house, but the world opens back up a bit, and then they are they're kind of wanting to get back out there and get back going again. I would say that they go to, let's say they go to their GP, which is classic, isn't it? Go to their GP and say, we've got a sore knee, doc, and they say, well, you should go and see a physio for that, or write you a referral. That referral goes in, they either find out at that point or at some point that's then 7 weeks wait or whatever it might be. It's what I'm hearing a lot about recently, including locally from what I understand. And they therefore think, well, this is something that's bothering me sufficiently for me to not want to wait that, and therefore they then seek help in private practice. And that's been happening quite frequently. There's a massive recruitment problem as far as I'm aware. So I'm talking about challenges now, is that's a good thing in some ways, good for private practice in many ways, but it's also something that I'm a firm believer in free at the point of access healthcare in this country. I like that as part of our safety net. I think MSK care is something that it'd be really stupid for us to then think that that's non-essential, and it should be a real cornerstone. I would say this, but it should be something that, as an entry point, I think it's a really important point of keeping people moving in order to try and decrease the mental and physical health sequelae that can occur from inactivity. So people can develop a back or knee or shoulder problem that then disrupts their normal behaviors in such a way that they can lead to more serious disease. And therefore, I want that as being a provision on the NHS, and I want it to be accessible. I want it to not have high waits. I want it to be quality. All my projects are based on that. And so the fact that that's not then accessible in such a way that then moves people into private practice, then that's all well and good as long as private practice can serve that need. So I'm hearing from so many different practices about a recruitment problem because there just isn't the therapist to go around. Now, one of the things that then is happening is that some are then trying to draw from the NHS. So even though there's a demand and a need everywhere, what private practice is able to do is be a bit more nimble about what they charge, right? So the NHS is busy. Say the clinicians are busy with back-to-back patients, with all the other bureaucracies that can occur. They've got cleaning schedules, they've got PPE, they've got various different things that are sort of disrupting their work patterns. And also I'm hearing from people that are saying that there's a difference in clinical need in terms of people that are sort of re-emerging from lockdowns, or there's a sort of social urgency to get better in such a way that then there's an impatience, a social awkwardness that's occurring from people that haven't communicated with others for a while, including some, therapists have been always working, but generally speaking, everyone's a bit rusty on interactions to some degree. So there's a lot of stress from what I'm hearing. Now they're getting back into practice and therefore maybe a bit not quite burnt out, perhaps some are, but not quite burnt out, but more just like is the grass greener? They're evaluating their jobs. They've got sort of your classic stereotypical band 6 job in an MSK department, and they're sort of weighing up their options. And that whilst they're weighing up their options, they then have got 17 different local private practices that are crying out for therapists because they're at the top of their current capacity. And so they are then, it's very much a buyer's market. And what that can be drawn on there is that the private practice can say, well, let's try and work out what a salary package or a perks package or working hours, or make it more flexible, or all sorts of different things that they can do that typically NHS services can't do. They can't necessarily, what is, from what I understand in the HR terms, job craft around each individual. And I think that makes for an interesting dynamic whereby they try to into there. Now, I've talked a lot about, and I sometimes over-romance this job in band 6 clinician in MSK departments, because I just think that they are what makes all the cogs turn across all the sectors, right? It's just this classic role. It's so important to improve the quality rehabilitation that occurs there. That mechanism I've just described in private practice that's putting pressure on and tempting them over, and so be it if they move. They make their own decision on that. It's a totally reasonable force, and a sensible thing for them to get what they can for their labour and to balance their life appropriately. If that means that there's more evening and weekend work so they can then have their kids on Wednesdays and Thursdays, then crack on. It's a shame, but unfortunately NHS services aren't able to be offering that flexibility at this point in time. Some are, some aren't. But there's also this first contact thing. So FCP, that's for those that don't know, which would be strange in this audience, but essentially then in primary care, physiotherapists working at the first point of contact in GP practices as sort of screened by, say, a receptionist to sit, come when someone presents to general practice with a sore knee, they see a physio instead of a doctor, is classically the thing. And there's money from NHS England and elsewhere that's supporting those things. Central government has supported that as a scheme, and therefore people are moving into those roles. And so that's a draw from that senior, especially senior 6s and 7s and stuff, from what would be a sort of job in a service. Some of them are linked and appropriately integrated. So I do accept that best practice models mean that people sometimes have FCP shifts within their role, or they have split roles and stuff. But some are just taking those roles as a pay rise, as a move, as that's where the industry's going. I'll give that a go for a bit, and I quite like assessments, and I'm less into treatments and stuff like that. Or they are ESPs that are old money ESPs that are then enjoying and wanting to do that sort of front end triage thing. A lot of the time, though, for the rehab needs, they would then be referring people into the services of which they vacated. So who's backfilling their posts? If you've got that bleed to FCP and you've got that bleed to private practice, you then end up with this, any vacancies that can occur within the main body of the system, within that sort of 5, 6, 7 base of rehab therapists in MSK departments, then if you're not fulfilling the demand, if the demand's still there with referrals, but you're not, the waiting lists go up. There's other release valves that can occur. You've then got this. Interestingly, what happens then is you get a swelling of the locum market, which has been more in recent years, been more highly regulated in terms of what hourly rates locums can create, and so they might then need to lift that cap in order to backfill, and then the model becomes really unsustainable because you're not able to generate that interest in those roles and departments, and some of the stability and security that people were craving for that. That one of the big draws was significant amounts of annual leave relative to other sectors, often the security for pensions, and the general stability that comes from those roles relative to pretty much any other in any other sector. There's a massive amount of stability that comes from working in what is the second or third biggest employer of people in the world, the NHS, after Chinese Rail or something like that, and Indian Steel or something, I forget, but it's like a massive employer of people. There's a massive job security that kind of comes with that, especially in such a buyer's market. So obviously, yes, your service could be taken over by a company in the independent sector, but the way in which they get chupied over and stuff. There's just a general stability to be able to sell your labour at an agenda for change rate, of which you might not be pleased with said rate, and many aren't, but generally speaking, that's a pretty stable job. And so I've described one take, admittedly. There are a few of the moving parts I could put in play there, but there's a few different things that when I'm talking about challenges, I think that is the biggest challenge, is that you're just going to have this brain drain from what I think are the cornerstone posts in the country. And this is the thing that I say that as someone that be able to add most clinical value. That's probably what I would say would be me and my skill set as a sort of jobbing clinician in a standard MSK department within, say, the community in which I live, so I understand those demographic needs. I think that's like a really important and valuable role that is then being pressurized from multiple different angles. And that concerns me. I think that's a challenge that is complex it's a complex analysis, but it's also a complex thing to solve. But I see it as being a real important one. I think if we don't try and resolve that and try and work together on it, then I think we're going to, the bubble will pop on that, really. Now, I'm not without my suggested solutions on it. The big one being, I'll cover the two main factors I've just described as being pressure on that workforce and the instability of the model. One is that in private practice, I think that there's better integrations to deal with those backlogs. So there are ways in which I think we could not have to. I don't mean suddenly you've got private practices complying with the any qualified provider style schemes to take on NHS patients. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. But generally speaking, the tariff-based care on that is something that if your private practice is getting patients that are willing to pay 65 quid an assessment, they're not suddenly going to be bending over backwards to take on patients that they might then get paid 28 quid or whatever the tariff might be for those patients, because they're the same patients paid a different way. If they don't need to, they don't need to. One of the things that's been a popular uptake of those sorts of contracts before is sometimes that's a standard and stable model of which you can build your staff base on. Whereas if those patients are coming into private practice anyway, that motivation to take on those contracts isn't. So I think we need to be more creative then about how we link in between sectors in localities, and also create blueprints when it's being done well. I'm hearing some stories that come about where NHS trusts and local private providers are able to work sensibly and ethically together well. And I think that those stories need to come forward, and we need to use those as case studies and templates for how we could do it elsewhere. I think on the first contact front, I think that there's just a lot of work being done, including on this show, really, to have some warts and all conversations about where we're up to with that. I think that's one of the big challenges that we face that I've mentioned is the role itself not being for everyone, and that it not being. I mean, Rob Goodwin mentioned on his podcast on Physio Matters recently about that somewhat inflexible in many ways. If it could be more obviously tailored to local needs, or the legacy services that they're bringing them into are very different, and they're often different for relevant reasons. And so if it could be more tailored, if it could be more less specific with how it has to be implemented based on the implementation guidance that's been provided over those roles, then maybe that can be a bit more of a sustainable model. My suggestion, as I sort of hinted to before, is if those roles are integrated and well linked to the departments and services that I'm talking about, and so people have got first contact days rather than first contact roles, if people have got a spread of different opportunities there that might help them to develop their careers, but also not have to hang their hat on one thing. I'm hearing from friends of mine that are sort of torn, admittedly saying, look, I don't think I'm going to fancy that role, to be honest. I think about the job, I've done a few trial shifts, I've shadowed some people, I don't fancy it necessarily, but I'm stagnant. I've been stuck for a while at the rate of pay, rate of responsibility I'm at, and so I feel like I'm going to need to give it a go, at least for a bit. I totally understand it. I'm sympathetic to that. I think that's an understandable force, really. And for some people, it unlocks a massive opportunity. And I think that drawing quality therapists nearer to the start of care to give the right information it's such a funny one, because the opportunities that not with first contact are enormous, but the challenges are ones that I think aren't being navigated necessarily so well. Easier said than done, you know. It's something that obviously I'm not in you know, I'm sure everyone's doing their best and that, you know, there's plenty of people that are working hard on this sort of stuff, but I just think that it's fascinating for me how we need to understand the instability and then try to offer solutions that will help rather than hinder. One of the things that I wanted to come to is that the way in which, and you've probably heard me talk about this quite a lot, really, is that the MSK workforce across physios, osteos, sports therapists, sports rehabbers, MSK doctors, podiatrists, occupational therapists, particularly in sort of the pain and functional rehab space. I'm missing others, you know, there's plenty of others, but also fitness professionals and exercise physiologists, S&C coaches where appropriate. Just fascinating underutility of that diversity, that professional diversity to solve some of these problems. You know, it's just a weird one. I think that one of the things that's sometimes naive is even if you sort of, I know the numbers on this, right? I know that you're dealing with the numbers cumulatively. It'd make a big difference, right? So I think it should be, you know, more posts should be more available for that professional diversity, especially for if you can just demonstrate quality and competence independent of your professional badge. But also that doesn't solve all of it, because physiotherapy has been such an overwhelming majority of MSK care delivery that then you've got far smaller numbers in each of those professions that I've just described, and also it's not always dead. You know, it's not simple. I'm not sort of suggesting that you could just open up those job roles and everything's okay. It needs to be managed and monitored. For example, you know, what MSK patients could be sensibly triaged to your average podiatrist, for example. Is it all lower limb? So you're getting podiatrists seeing femoroacetabular impingement when there's no indication of a foot and ankle based solution in most of those cases. Are they competent to appropriately manage, triage, rehabilitate, screen that when someone presents with groin pain? You know, it's like the complex advanced practice triage that can occur there. Some podiatrists, knock your spots off with that. But I don't know the competency framework of that as an entry point of a profession for that to be, if there's a lower limb role somewhere, lower limb advanced practice role, just to how far down the limb does it need to go for podiatrists to be either the best people to see those or amongst the best team. It's complicated, but there are certainly that conversation needs to mature in order for us to sort of stabilize it and to turn this into a proper opportunity. And also, I think what's funny is that if we don't do that across the board, across sector, then amusingly, the places that can move fastest, namely the independent private sector, small private practice, will mop up, and there'll be plenty of people that don't like that. You know, any sensible private practice is going to be just like, well, I don't give a shit whether they're a physio or not. I'm going to get this graduate sports rehabber who's really up to speed and really in keeping with our sort of morals, ethics, and practices in this clinic, and will work under our brand proudly. We don't give a monkeys. Our patients don't give a monkeys exactly what it says on his degree. We don't take insurance patients anymore because that's crap as well. We're just taking cash payers, and they're brilliant, and they're getting people better, and we measure our outcomes in this way. And everyone's a member of MSKR because we really care about quality standards and come by our. But I'm just meaning that I've just described is something that can happen tomorrow, right? You don't need systematic infrastructure change. You need a change in mindset many times by people that are doing the recruiting in these private practices, but some of those clinicians, and that's some of them, it's not across the board. I'm not suddenly saying that they're without fault, so you don't get people that are full of shit in every different profession. But I'm just meaning that those that can get ahead do, and they will do so because they can move much quicker. So if the industry itself doesn't sort of think cleverly about those opportunities that might knock, then yeah, basically the sort of independent practices run away from it, and some people won't be happy with that. And I'd understand why, because it becomes something that's then, we still end up with that sort of pseudo-regulation problem that occurs across MSK, whereby it's really difficult for us to all self-regulate. There's a lot of taboos around it and stuff, and so you end up with this challenge. Some of the challenges only get perpetuated. So So what I'm just gonna open up my chat comments again. I've got a lovely, you see, counter to Meekins' point. Nice hair. Fiona said, "Oh, this breaks my heart. I've been quite pleased with this episode, this monologue, and apparently the audio's crackly. So, damn, that's really annoying. I'm really sorry. I should have checked that a few more times. Really, I relied on bloody Meekins. He gave me an okay sign, and I thought it was okay. So I should have left the comments open. I'm really sorry, guys." Um, Zach Reed, what's Zach saying? Thank you, tuning in, Zach. There are thousands of graduate sports therapists and graduate sports rehabbers that don't get full-time opportunities in private practice or NHS at the appropriate level, as these opportunities are almost exclusively physio only. If it's a problem with competency levels, how can we bridge that? If these roles, I don't want to read the rest of this and I can't see it. Let's have a look. If these roles are accepted, what needs to change to get more of these roles opened up? Zach, wow, you read my mind. Or did you post that before? I read your mind. I didn't see this comment and I've just spoken to it. So thanks so much for that. Completely agree. I hope what I just said speaks to that. And if it doesn't, let me know. Drop me another comment or come on the show if you fancy it. We can unpack that a little further because we're out of time. So I'm really sorry. I'd love to have had maybe a back and forth with you about that because I agree. I want to answer your questions. I think that's probably one for another show. How can we bridge that gap, MSKR? Quality assured standards in the excellence framework that was provided on that. Like, how can we aspire to a value set that's similar and aspire people to functional gain and not be siloed by interventions? That's what the argument is in the chapter of the manifesto. So go to mskreform.org.uk, although mskr.org.uk does work as well, and download the manifesto for reform. Look at the clinical excellence chapter. Fiona's then replied to Zach saying we have more graduate sports therapists and sports rehabbers in our team now than physios. Wow, great asset to the team. That's really interesting, Fiona. I'd love to hear from you, and please, let me know if you fancy coming on the show to talk about your experiences with that, because I think done well, that's the way it's going to go. And interesting. I don't think I've heard of practices that then have tipped the balance the other way now, so they're in the majority. I think that's really interesting. Gemma said that it wasn't crackling all the time. Awesome as always, my friend. Well, thank you so much. I will finish with that lovely comment. That's brilliant. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry if there has been some intermittent crackling. I need to probably sort that out. It's a fancier mic than I probably need, but I hope I kept my mic disciplined and you've been able to hear me loud and clear, even when it's been a bit crackly. So apologies for that. Really interested to hear your thoughts, and thanks so much. I'm sorry I can't get to all the comments, and I'm well into overtime now. But this is one that will roll on. I want to hear from you about it. I want you to come on the show about it. It's like such an important big picture topic. And I also want to know if you think I'm just wrong. Like, there is a bit of I actually put in the description about my optimism. I will leave you with this. I am inherently optimistic. I've created some ridiculously ambitious projects that are inherently optimistic. And yet, despite that disposition, I think that inherent instability that exists in the middle of the road MSK practice, particularly in the NHS, which I think are cornerstone roles in our industry, it's so vulnerable. And I do worry about that. I'm quite pessimistic about that at the moment because I don't think the maturity of the conversation is there. I don't think the powers that be are really sensing it. I don't think we have set the scene to be able to have those conversations without there being really deep ideological rifts that can develop there with regards to sort of skepticism of profit in healthcare. It's just, it's just a bit of a childish conversation that usually emerges from that. Ideological, basis of poor ethics of what the price point should be and how that should relate to salary is also one, on the other side of it. So there's a few different things that make me a bit pessimistic, I'm afraid, at the moment. And I'm sorry for that because I'm not used to it. But I know that this show will always be a place in which we can have that out sensibly and hopefully try and move the needle towards progress. I've mentioned it a few times, but we've got some real cool tricks up a sleeve planned for MSKR with MSKR to try and solve some of those. And you can hear about those at the Thinking in Public stream at Therapy Live. So there's a Therapy Live plug to finish with as well. Right, I'm going to clear off. I said I would, and I said that about 10 minutes ago, didn't I? So bye for now, and thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow with Obi Hassan. We're doing Finance Fridays. So those that are in private practice or at least interested in their own financial health, then join us with Obi tomorrow. We're going to get really stuck into some forecasting and business growth stuff for those private practices as described today, that are booming. So some top tips from him and some information about his latest events as well. So take care. I'll see you tomorrow.